Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming along to this mindset talk. The idea of these talks is that they might offer something that would be, powerful enough to set you off on a new way of thinking, possibly on a long-term basis. And the aspect that I'm going to be sharing about is the mind and the brain and me and how these relate to one another and who is what. It's quite a mystery, actually, to many. I started thinking about this a little over 30 years ago. I'd been leading a very harum-scarum life in newspapers and as a journalist and family life, and everything was seemingly going along all right, but I started feeling as if I was getting intellectually drained and possibly emotionally drained too. And I stepped back for a bit, came across the Brahma Kumaris and their Raja Yoga meditation, and I didn't understand it because it talked about things that, as a science writer, I didn't really have the brain wiring or the sort of structure of understanding to get it, speaking about the dimension of the soul and a region beyond the material realm. But I felt nourished immediately by the company of the people who were practicing these things. I felt love, frankly. I sort of fell in love with love. There's that little poem, as I was going up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish to God he'd go away. You know that one. It was a little bit like that, except a more positive version, where I was in love with something that I didn't believe in or know what it was. And so this was very lovely and a little bit confusing, but certainly it was doing the job of making me feel as if I was understanding myself better. I was getting to know myself better. Because ultimately, I suppose, as some of you who've been on the spiritual journey may fully appreciate, we are love. We are actually, deep down, we are love. That is the essential nature of who we are. If we don't find ourselves experiencing love, we feel as if we're not really being ourselves. Of course, there are times when we step out of that feeling. We have tasks to do. We have to get engaged in things, but essentially if our lives lack love, we feel as if they're not worth living. Would you agree with that? Generally, I think that's most people's experience, and so that was something of what was happening to me. Anyway, I made a few inquiries. I read a few of the kind of advanced theoretical physics stuff at that time, 30 years back, to try to understand in more scientific terms what I was experiencing to be so lovely, to be considering myself to be a conscient entity, a unit of consciousness, as some scientists are now looking at it, a soul, a non-physical entity. And actually, it's a very beautiful thing that when we look at one another, of course, if you just look in the superficially, you see hair, you see a face, you see a body. But actually, when we look into each other's eyes, as the saying about the eyes being the window on the soul includes this understanding, when we look into one another's eyes, we actually see, I think, the element of truth, that we are actually conscious beings. That's the core of who we are. But I didn't understand that. I was so caught in the material model that I didn't get that at the time. But that one of the central practices in Raja Yoga meditation, which if you've tried it out in any of the meditation tents, you'll find it very beautiful, is that you sit, you're still, you're invited to keep your eyes open, and sometimes it's conducted by a practiced meditator who lets their gaze move around the room and just look at you. And there's something about that is like an awakening, and that was what I experienced. Anyway, fast forward a good number of years. I just carried on with my work and with my career, but I found that it was hugely more enjoyable after I'd started nourishing myself in these very beautiful, practical ways with these feelings and experiences. I became less needy as a colleague. Eventually, I became less needy in my personal relationships too, but I think more loving as well. But still, it was a long time before I really developed the sort of beginnings, and it's still a process underway, the beginnings of an understanding of what what this is really all about. And it's very different to the conventional way of seeing things that we all have. Most of us are, if you listen to most of the radio discussions about philosophy, about science, there'll be an underlying assumption that we are somehow, the mind is somehow a product of the brain. The complexity of these magnificent brains that we have, the 100 billion neurons, the trillions of connections that our brains are able to make. And that does seem a natural assumption, because if you hit me on the head with a hammer, I'll lose consciousness. If you give me certain drugs, my consciousness will alter. If you give me an anaesthetic, I may lose a sense of pain. And so there are these signals that there's obviously a close connection between consciousness and the brain. But there is actually now a school of thought that is emerging. I wouldn't say it's fringe science, it's frontier science. There's some really leading people who are putting this forward as a serious proposition, that actually the brain is secondary and consciousness is first, and that this applies right across the board, that consciousness is actually running this show that we're in. And there's a lot that lies behind that statement, and I can discuss this further with you. I've got various references that those interested, I can give you to follow this through. But in a nutshell, that's the picture that is starting to emerge. You see, brain scientists have really developed very sophisticated techniques now for looking at what is happening inside the brain as we do various tasks. They thought that with these complex mapping techniques that they've got, it's called fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, where they actually sort of different parts of the brain light up as you do different tasks or experience different feelings. And they thought that they might see from this, well, this is the center of consciousness, this is the seat of consciousness, this part of the brain is responsible for producing this kind of awareness. And definitely there are specific sections of the brain that are connected with different skills, but many different parts of the brain light up in a whole kind of variety of ways as we experience different things. So you can't say that there's a particular track or a particular place that is producing your consciousness. Instead, it seems as if there's something outside the brain that is putting the whole picture together. The brain is like a supercomputer, but it's a machine. It's not the entity that is actually the conscient being that is experiencing. This is the picture that's emerging, and brain scientists are wedded to the idea that they will find a seat of consciousness in the brain, but they've failed in that so far, and they're admitting quite openly, although they think that if they keep looking, ultimately they'll solve the mystery. But they are admitting at present that it is a huge mystery as to how we go from chemical and electrical activity, which they can track very nicely with their modern techniques, how we go from that to, the scene that is in front of me, the sense of the reality of you and you and you. Why do we have some kind of common understanding of an orange sari or of a white cap or whatever it might be? We have how do we go from a chemical and electrical activity to the sense of green or red? They can't explain that. But looking at things the other way around, as this new paradigm is doing, and saying that consciousness is actually primary, and consciousness is putting in place the brain that gives you the equipment to experience what consciousness is inviting you to experience. In other words, there's a kind of that matter is secondary and mind is first. That shift is really being pushed for quite strongly by some scientists now. Okay, that's theoretical, but where's the evidence for the need for this, apart from the fact that conventional thinking just isn't explaining these mysteries of consciousness? Well, there's a number of things that are emerging. One of the most profound has been, these brain studies for a start. There's a book called The Brain That Changes Itself. It pulls together all the evidence that's come with these recent brain scanning insights, and it's very clear that every thought and feeling we have changes the brain. This is an amazing new insight. We're not the victims of our brains. Of course, to some extent, the state of the brain does determine our consciousness, but according to how we think and choose to think and feel, so our brain changes. If you think habitually in a sad way, there are neurons that will increase in a certain brain area, will increase in number and activity, that will facilitate your thinking sadly, and vice versa with happiness. If you think learning the piano, you will learn almost as fast, and they've done this in trials, you learn almost as fast as people who actually learn the piano physically. When they're actually put in front of a piano, the people who've only done it mentally, they're behind the others, but they soon catch up. The brain has started to change according to the practice that was taking place only mentally, not actually playing the piano. Sportsmen know about this. They can play in their minds the game and the scene that they want to be successful in, and they will actually help prepare themselves for that physically. The brain is changing to help them in that task. But this is a misnomer. The brain that changes itself, as the author of this book says, we've no idea how it does it, but it seems as if that's the case. But suppose instead you postulate that you are not the brain, but it's you that is changing the brain according to your decisions, your judgments, your choices, your will, because you're consciousness and you're not the brain. Then it starts to make sense. Okay, so that's one area of evidence. Another one is the near-death experience. Have you all heard of this, where people have died clinically? Perhaps they had a heart attack and stopped breathing. The heart has stopped beating. There's no blood circulating through the brain. And yet minutes later, thanks to modern resuscitation techniques, they're brought back and they're alive again. Well, there's a very consistent description that has come from many of the people who have this experience. Maybe many more have it but don't remember it. But one big study in Holland, which tracked over several hospitals, they interviewed all the people they could find who'd had these experiences, who died clinically and then been resuscitated. They had about 300 cases, and a fifth of them had more than slightly over 60, described one of these near-death experiences, and there's amazing consistency to it. It's not the jangling and horror of someone with brain damage, where there's confusion and upset. It's a very lucid experience where the person, sometimes it goes in different levels. To begin with, the person may see the surgeons struggling to bring them back. They're observing it and thinking, I'm not actually dead. What's going on? And then they sort of realise, well, I must be outside this body. And then sometimes they'll see worried relatives in another part of the hospital hurrying towards where their body lies. They go a bit further and they sometimes describe a life review, where some particular scenes where they hadn't acknowledged how much hurt they might have caused another, it comes to mind. And they see it from the other person's point of view, not as a judgmental thing, but just, that's how they felt when I did that. And there's a kind of settling of that kind of issue. And then very commonly a description of going through a kind of tunnel into a warm, welcoming light, that they feel as if this is just love, and as if they still got a sense of self, they're still a consciousness, but they've got no brain that's functioning that's giving them this consciousness. So they're puzzled. And in this zone that lies outside the space-time of our ordinary awareness, they find that they just take their mind to a particular place, and there they are. The person might have been long deceased, but it's as if they can communicate with them telepathically in that way. Very, very common description of this kind. And then they go a little higher, and they feel as if often they feel as if they're met by angelic beings who sometimes have a message to them. You have to return because you've more to do down at this material level. But sometimes they feel as if they're getting so far beyond that they're just in a realm of absolutely pure love. It's very common for them to come back feeling that the truth about life is love, and that the truth about God is love. One of the many quotes in the study that was put up about this, wonderful, insightful quotes. Like I remember one of the subjects saying, I realised that death is just a big, nasty, bad lie. And they really felt it deeply. And this sense of the love of that lies at the heart of consciousness of creation, that also comes very strongly. And when they relive their lives, they often make dramatic changes. They realise that the way they'd been living before was driven and, not giving them what they wanted out of life, perhaps. And they feel that they'd much rather live in ways where love is alive in their lives, rather than selfishness or greed or ego drive, these kind of things. They often change dramatically for the rest of their lives. They've done long-term studies of the people who had these experiences. So I remember another of the quotes was, when they were feeling this love, they said, with their minds, one of these subjects said, is this God? And the answer came to them, no, this is God's breath. Isn't that brilliant? These are such consistent descriptions. And these are scientific studies. The biggest of these was published in The Lancet, a very respected medical journal. It was by a Dutch cardiologist, and really very, very fine piece of work, because he puts it in the context of new thinking that's emerging from physics as well, about what they call a non-local space, which sort of embraces space-time. It's as if space-time is like the cinema that we're in a sense, or the virtual reality show that we're in, but there's another reality that's deeper than that. And when they've died, in quotes, and have gone beyond this body, that's when they access this deeper dimension of things. Okay, a few more studies that are supporting this idea of this being a deeper reality than the everyday reality we experience. A number of scientists have had these near-death experiences, sometimes not near death, but there's one where their brain, a brain scientist in America, she suffered a big stroke, a big hemorrhage in her left hemisphere, and she felt the left hemisphere, which is specialised in our rational, intellectual functions, she felt it shutting down, and it was disturbing to her, but then she felt as if she was released into this incredible sense of oneness with everything that is. An amazingly deep experience. And similarly with a book called, I think, Heaven is Real, by a neurosurgeon in the States who had one of these experiences too. So there's a lot of evidence coming through now pointing in the direction of the idea that the brain may be a kind of filter that handles a certain level of reality for us at a material level, keeps out of vast oceans of information that are like the supercomputer that's running the show that we're in, because we don't need all that, but that to access that deeper dimension from time to time is really valuable, because it's where we sense the deeper truth about ourselves, that we're not just human doings, that we're not just, here for survival, that we're actually spirit having a human experience. And many of the things that I've learned through the path of Raja Yoga, many of them are to do with living in ways that allow you to think less, that allow you to be still. Like, don't have critical thoughts of others. Try to see the strengths in others rather than the weaknesses. Then it emerges this love that connects you to that deeper dimension. Try not to worry about things. Understand that there's an overall plan. This forms a part of the philosophy that I've espoused, and it allows you to be much more accepting of things as they are. And from there, you actually become more functional in improving them very often, rather than if you destroy yourself with worry or upset. So these kind of things the whole picture is adding up. Many of the injunctions about how to live that the great religious founders gave, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Abraham, these traditions, they're very often connected with living in ways that, as well as coping with life in its practical sense, will actually also allow us to connect to this deeper dimension, which many of us have lost connection with through the hurly-burly of today's lives. So that was really essentially what I wanted to share with you, that there is a brain, there is a mind, which is like the interface between me and the brain, but really me is this conscient entity, this unit of consciousness that's part of the deep aspect of reality that is eternal, and that really I will find so much happiness if I reconnect to that aspect of myself and realise that that there's more to life than matter and brains. Thank you very much. If any of you wanted to get some of the references or go into any of this a bit more, we've got a chance to sit in the cool under the trees over there. There's a round table where we can have a bit more of a chat if you'd like to do that.